Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be moderating today's panel about a very important topic known as AUKUS, which is the Trilateral Security Agreement reached in 2021. What's interesting about having this panel today is it comes at a time when we've seen more engagement by the United States in the region, more port visits by the Navy, and as recently as yesterday, more announcements about technology sharing between the three nations. And it also comes at a time when there are key questions about some of the legislative measures and other details that need to be worked out to reach a point where the deal can continue to move forward. And I don't think we could ask for a better panel to have this conversation with. And so I'm going to go to my right and introduce everybody very briefly. I'd like to start with Ted Colbert, who is the Executive Vice President of the Boeing Company and President and Chief Executive Officer of Boeing Defense, Space, and Security. Sitting next to him is Representative Seth Moulton I'll go one further. And then sitting next to him is Matt Pottinger, who is the former U.S. Principal Deputy National Security Advisor. Sitting next to him is Ambassador Kevin Rudd, who's the Australian ambassador to the United States. And sitting next to him is Representative Wittman from the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Thank you.
I want to encourage everyone to please submit your questions because we'll look forward to asking some of them to our panelists very shortly. I'd like to begin by pulling up some of the survey results from the Reagan National Defense Forum survey because I think they're quite illuminating about how the American public is thinking about AUKUS. There were two questions that came up. The first one asked, how much, if anything, have you heard about AUKUS? And 73% said they were not aware. But at the same time, when they asked the participants if they wanted to see an agreement in which the US, the UK, and Australia were to reach an agreement to work on countering threats from China, 58% said they supported it. And so I'd like to start with our US policymaker first, and then I will ask Ambassador Rudd and Mr. Colbert to follow up. Based on those surveys, what is the strategic importance of this deal specifically? What does it do to achieve what the American public is saying they want, which is these three nations working together to combat threats from China? So I'm going to treat this as a jump on. I'll leave one of you three to get us started.
Sure. I think that is the cornerstone of our effort. Thank you. I think that AUKUS is the cornerstone of our effort to have the capability and capacity to deter China. If you look at the advantage that we have in the undersea world, that is significant. We have to be able to build more submarines. The way that we do that is not just to increase capacity in the United States, but to work with our partners in Australia and the United Kingdom, who are right there at the forefront of having the technology to be able to do that. If you look at submarine manufacture that already is taking place in the UK, and if you look at the heavy industrial manufacturing capability of Australia, one of the greatest capabilities across the globe, we need to utilize that. That's the most effective way that we can counter and deter the Chinese in their malign influence in the Indo-Pacific. I think that's incredibly important, and it's important to us too to make sure that the supplemental that's coming up, the $3.4 billion in the supplemental for the submarine industrial base gets through. That helps us, the United States, partner with the dollars that Australia has committed to make sure we build the submarine industrial base, to make sure we build the number of suppliers. We've been now working with the Australians, building the submarine industrial base there. We need to do more in the United States. I think historically, we will look back on this and see that this is the turning point where we were able to, with joint capabilities amongst the three countries, have that turning point to deter and counter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific.
I'll maybe just chime in. First of all, to say that I completely agree with my Republican colleague. And we were chatting before about how the Armed Services Committee is one of the last bastions of bipartisanship on Capitol Hill. I think this is a completely bipartisan position, so we're very supportive of it. But I want to just step back for a second, because when I hear that people don't understand that this is important, it's not just about the details of the arrangement or why allies matter. It's about the big picture. I'm amazed by the number of people who just don't understand how fundamental deterring China must be to our future. Because here's the deal. If Xi Jinping does exactly what he said he will do and decides to invade Taiwan, we have two terrible options, only two, and they're both really bad. The first, of course, is that we defend Taiwan, and that will cost a lot of lives. I'm confident we will win that fight, but we're talking Vietnam War level casualties in the space of a few weeks. We could wake up tomorrow and see 2 US aircraft carriers at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The second option is that we say, oh no, we're kidding. We're not gonna do anything. We're not gonna get involved. And I think there are a lot of Americans who think that that is a viable choice for the United States of America, not understanding the massive economic costs to ceding all our advanced chip production in the world to Chinese control, not understanding what that would do to undermine deterrence all over the globe if all our other allies say the United States isn't serious about its commitments, or our adversaries say the United States won't stand up for democracies. So we have to succeed at deterring China. And frankly, if we don't, and a war starts, we might win that war, but it could very well escalate to World War III. So for everything that's gone well in Ukraine, because pretty much every analyst in the world expected that Russia would conquer Ukraine in a matter of weeks, we have to admit that in Ukraine, deterrence failed, and we have to succeed at deterrence in the Pacific. So then anything that we do that increases deterrence, anything that we're discussing on the Select Committee on China, on which we both sit, where we talk about economic strategies, where we talk about competitiveness strategies, it all has to come back to deterrence. And this deal, AUKUS, helps us with deterrence.
Matt? I wanted you, if you could expand on that point that Representative Moulton just made. What is it about this deal specifically that answers the threat that the American public recognizes that threat from?
Well, I agree with everything I've heard on my left and right. One thing is that it actually involves a major European power, the United Kingdom. We don't want to see the kind of thinking that unfortunately we saw play out last summer when the French president visited China and essentially on his flight home said, Taiwan's really not our problem, that's America's problem. AUKUS is partly an answer to that as well. The effects, if Taiwan is coerced into, coercively annexed, forcibly annexed under China, the effects of that are, think about the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, and then think about COVID in 2020, and then add those two together and multiply it by 2. That's what we're going to be feeling economically. We're going to be in a very, very different world the next day, and it is not going to be one that's amenable to free democracy. So the fact that the United Kingdom's involved, I think, is actually quite crucial.
Ambassador Rudd, I must imagine that it's shocking to hear that 73% of people haven't heard of AUKUS, because I imagine the numbers are quite different in your country. I wonder if you could help us understand.
Don't bet on it. Don't bet on it.
What advantages does the United States gain from Australia in joining this agreement?
Well, I think just on your point about 73%, I'm kind of delighted about the 27. And we sort of had a minimalist perspective of these things. But, this is a very young agreement. We're talking about something which was signed off by the President and the 2 Prime Ministers in March this year, and we've just got into December. It's a new feature of the geopolitical landscape. It'll become better known over time. On your core question, which is what's in this for America, which is an entirely valid question, I agree with Rob and with Seth and with Matt. The bottom line here is we all have a deeply realist analysis of the fact that Xi Jinping's China is not a status quo China. Xi Jinping's China is a change the status quo China. That's radically different. Therefore, when you apply that, therefore, to Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea, and more broadly, it brings into immediate focus the question of how do you sustain strategic stability under those circumstances, for which there's only one conceptual answer, and it's what my colleagues have just said: deterrence, deterrence, deterrence. On the flip side to effective deterrence, as C.Q. Brown just reminded us up on this stage half an hour ago, is warfighting capability. Because the Chinese Communist Party are not dumb. We can sort of talk about deterrence as a concept, but unless they form a material conclusion that it's real, that it's got teeth, that it's got substance, it's got flesh and it's got blood attached to it, then they won't believe it. On the core bits in the middle of it, what do you get as Americans? Number one, we Australians co-invest with you in your submarine industrial base. There'll be a combined investment, additional investment of some $6.5 billion US in the immediate years ahead. I've been down to Groton, I've been to Newport News, I know what the base looks like, I know what the needs are. This is not just a casual piece of cash, by the way. It actually makes a material difference to ship lines of production, the recruiting the workforce for the future. It's quite substantive. The second thing you get is that as our fleet evolves over the immediate decade or plus ahead, you'll end up with an Australian attack class submarine fleet of about 10 boats. Add that to your own SSN fleet of, say, 65, 66 boats. Add that to the Brits. We're starting to look at a reasonable global capability here, and remember, ours is in the Indo-Pacific by virtue of its geography. What's the third thing you get? You get the world's fourth only nuclear boat building facility. That'll be in Adelaide in South Australia. We currently build conventional boats there, conventional submarines. And so that is now under development. The final thing that comes with this is you'll have not just a shipbuilding facility, but in Fleet Base West in Perth in Western Australia, you'll have a fully fledged repair and maintenance facility for all US nuclear-powered boats in Indo-Pacific, which you currently don't have. So what I see for that from the US taxpayer is win, 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 win. What I see for us is good, 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 good. So I think we're heading in the right direction. And I really do thank Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, for getting behind these critical pieces of legislation.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Colbert, we have a number of defense industry companies represented here. Based on what you've heard from our fellow panelists, what do you see as the best incentive for private industry to collaborate, particularly under Pillar 2 of AUKUS?
Look, let me go back to the first question because I want to make it very sort of practical from a layman American perspective. If you think about any situation where you have an adversary, going to fight alone is usually not the best position you want to be in. So you call up the people that you know that can fight just right there with you and collect your resources together and demonstrate that strength to the adversary first. And then if you're ready to fight, you call them up and you make it happen. From an industry perspective, that manifests itself in the way that we operate with, frankly, our partners, we call our competimates, and the two countries that we're talking about, UK and Australia. The capability and capacity that we talked about earlier is so important to being able to deter our adversary and fight when we need to fight. In our case, I have 4,000 teammates in Australia, a little under 5,000 in the UK. Why wouldn't I want to make and take advantage of all of that capacity and capability around the world to innovate the next generation of products? And we have great, great examples of that. So that's where it all starts. Just the beginning part of it, which is taking advantage of the diversity of talent around the world to innovate. And then when we field those products, the fact that we've innovated together allows us to actually work together better when the fight happens. The focuses on architectural principles like interoperability and modularity and all the things we're doing around autonomy. If we do those things together from the beginning the right way, it allows us to communicate better and fight together better. Back to my point around how you really want to fight. And then in the long tail of all of this, working together around the world with the geographic diversity allows us in the sustainment world and keeping things flying and keeping things moving forward, dealing with logistics and supply chains. It allows us to leverage each other in all of the capacity we have in that space as well. So the incentive is really clear to all of us. It allows us to work together. It allows us to innovate faster, take advantage of more capability around the world, and support the warfighter in a way that we've never done it before. So this is good news, and all the diverse elements of Pillar 2 represent tremendous opportunities to go and just do that.
We all have done a wonderful job in terms of describing the opportunities that AUKUS offers, but there are a lot of practical challenges between now and then, and I want to go through one of them. And I'll start with you, Representative Wittman. We've heard proposals on the Hill that the transfer of Virginia-class submarines not happen until the Navy Secretary is able to certify that the U.S. domestic industrial base can produce these at a way that does not hurt U.S. National security. Do you think that we will see bills that will be approved to keep Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 on track? And if so, when will we see them?
Yes, I do. I think that you will see them, some of that in this year's National Defense Authorization Act. There are pending bills there, H.R. 4725, the AUKUS Oversight and Accountability Act, that helps us on the side of ITAR to make sure we can transfer technology. Those things are going to be incredibly important. Where we are today in the submarine industrial base is building about 1.2 Virginia-class submarines per year. We have to get to build 2.3 per year, along with 1 Columbia-class. That is a significant challenge. I believe that we can do that. The effort has to be getting the provisions in this year's NDAA passed. It has to make sure that we fund the supplemental, which builds capacity in the submarine industrial base. It has to be reflected in next year's president's budget, continued investment in the submarine industrial base. We have to make sure that agreements are long-term, multi-year agreements with Australia, with the United Kingdom in submarine building enterprise. I believe that those things will happen, but you cannot have success if any one of those things don't happen. The supplemental has to happen this year. If it doesn't, it delays AUKUS. A delay in AUKUS, I think, shows to China that there may be a weakness in resolve. I'm confident there is no weakness in resolve. We have to be able to get that done. I think that that is foundational to what we can do to change the formula in the Indo-Pacific. But all of those things have to be part of that effort. And here's something, too, that should put this in perspective. If you look at the capacity of the Chinese to build ships, this is a sobering factor. They have 23.2 million tons of capability of building ships. We have 100,000 tons of capability, almost 100 times difference. If you were to take all of our shipyards, every single one of them, and combine them together on a geographic footprint, they would equal one of the more than dozen shipyards in China. The enterprise we have before us is significant. It is big. We have to get it done. The only way we do that is through these sorts of agreements like AUKUS, where we can leverage great capability and capacity in Australia, in the United Kingdom, to counter this malign threat from China.
And I'll just add a really quick point to your point about shipbuilding capacity is now we'll have a forward repair yard as well. I mean, we have 2 East Coast repair yards, wrong side of the world, wrong ocean, not very helpful in a fight against China. To be able to bring a ship right into Australia is a huge advantage for us.
That's a great point. We need more capacity in the Pacific to be able to repair those ships, and not just here at CONUS, but elsewhere in the theater. You're not going to bring something 6,000 miles here to get it repaired.
Well, God mandated that we in Australia would be both Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean country. And we also happen to be friends with you fellows and have been that way for quite a long period of time now. And I think through thick and thin have proven to be a reasonably reliable ally. Unlike the Brits, we didn't try to burn down the White House either. So,
I think it was Canadian troops under British command. So,
I already detected that Matt was a little bit Anglophile there in his earlier remarks. But that's only the War of 1812. It's a while ago now. But the bottom line is, there you've got the geography, which colleagues have just spoken to. And I think bottom line is this. I mean, I've seen all the numbers in terms of shipyard constraint and capacity right now, whether it's at Groton or Newport News, 1.2, 1.43, the reverse, I should say, per year. And it needs to be north of 2. This is where the additional investment is critical, that which is in the existing pipeline from this administration, the supplemental of $3.4 billion, the further investment from us. This materially begins to make a change. And one of the interesting things just the other day visiting Groton is that their forward employment needs, that is the workforce, is now virtually in schedule. That is, the people they need from the shop floor up for the next 2 to 3 years, they're now recruited in this post-COVID environment. So that's, I think, where AUKUS helps deliver part of the response in terms of the added capability here. Secondly, what do you get? Globally, you get an additional shipyard. You get, if the ethos of our age is supply chain resilience, not just in a civilian economy, but in the military economy as well, we have an enormous advantage in ensuring that in the Indo-Pacific, with your most reliable ally, you have a capacity there to evolve this entire new resilient ecosystem, and similarly with the Brits in the transatlantic. And finally, with what's called AUKUS Pillar 2. This is the unspoken of revolution. It is about, finally, half a century later, deciding, 3/4 of a century later, deciding that the Brits and the Australians can be trusted. And we'll still have a debate about the Brits. But no, the bottom line is this, that we can, if we've been trusting each other with our most sensitive intelligence material since 1946, the time has come now to have a seamless defence science, technology, industry sector between the three of us, free of ITARs, free of FMS, in both directions, so that we can turbocharge the development and innovation speed of getting ideas into product development and into the hands of the warfighter. And I think there's just a huge turbocharging of each other's ecosystems which is going to come out of this. That's the unspoken of revolution that's going to occur, whether it's in guided missiles, whether it's in drones, whether it's in unmanned aerial vehicles or unmanned undersea vehicles. There is a huge revolution about to unfold, and it has resilience built into it by virtue of the geography of AUKUS.
I want to ask about the industrial capability and talk about ships just a little bit more, and I'll leave it to all of you to decide who wants to tackle this. Does the U.S. need then to build another shipyard to have the industrial capability to meet not only the demands of AUKUS, but also providing the Navy with new attack and ballistic missile submarines? Should this be a part of the next DoD budget, and would Congress support that?
Listen, I'll jump in because I feel very strongly about this. I do believe that we need additional capacity and capability, whether it's in the form of a new yard, which will take years to capitalize, or whether it's something simpler, and that is having other yards like we see right now, places like Austell down in the Gulf, that are building panels for Virginia-class submarine. I think what you have to look at is how do we build the submarine industrial base? You can do that immediately. You can take that capability and have them build parts for the submarine, bring those to Groton, bring those to Newport News, have them assembled there. That gives you immediate capability and capacity. Do we need another shipyard? Probably. How do we get that operationalized? It will take years to be able to do that. The question is how do we bridge that? We bridge that by using existing capability to build parts, not just for submarines, but for our surface ships and others. That's the way that we can close the gap.
But you talked about it taking years. Given the problems, though, sustaining subs, only 35 of 50 are operational, do you think there's the political will then to sell 10% of the U.S. operational sub fleet between that delta, essentially, what's the demand and the time it would take to sort of boost up capability and production?
I think there is. I think we have to. I think that if you look at how the agreement is going to go forward, I think that as we sell those submarines, I think there's also an element there of a metric to say that organic capacity has to continue to mature and be built in Australia, which I think it will, but those two have to be tied together. I think it's incredibly important for both countries to be able to demonstrate that. So we can say as we sell the first one that Australia's 50% or so more complete with organic capacity. That assures both Australians and Americans that the enterprise is going to be successful and that it's going to be there in the long run.
And just to add to that, we're not starting flat-footed on this. Right now, we've already had, we're into our third class of graduates from Australian naval officers down in Charleston on the manning of nuclear ships, nuclear boats. Secondly, we've got between 50 and 100 Australians already either in or on their way to Pearl on Virginia-class maintenance. We've created already in Australia an additional 4,000 or 5,000 university places for nuclear boat-specific STEM courses. We are gearing up quite rapidly, and the legislation's not even through the Congress yet. So if legislation doesn't get through the Congress, you better let me know, because we've already started. So, but we think this is right, and we want to hit the ground running.
I think, again, it's just important to bring this back to the argument for deterrence and why this improves deterrence. And we can sell that to the American public. I would rather have Australia in the fight with us, with the same capabilities, well coordinated, our navies training and operating together. I think that when China looks out and sees not just the United States from far away saying, we don't want you to do this, but they see a lot of allies, including Australia, right up close, that's helpful. We grew up learning that entangling alliances were a bad idea because that's what led to World War I. But actually, in terms of deterrence, I think those kinds of alliances are really good. That's part of what we have in NATO and why it's been so effective. And I mean, one of the greatest signs here is that China hates AUKUS.
Yes.
That's a very important sign.
Seth, I think that's an incredibly important point. If you watch Chinese reaction to the things that the United States does strategically, the biggest and most emotional reaction from China was when we entered into the AUKUS agreement. And when they see advancements happening in the AUKUS agreement, that drives them crazy. That tells me, and should tell the rest of us, that that's what worries them the most, because they look at their effort. Their effort is transactional coercion. They look to coerce others through transaction to do things to help them. They don't like it when we have these agreements that are actually based upon trust and joint efforts between friends of the United States. That concerns them. That's why this is an incredibly valuable agreement, and I think will be the cornerstone of what we can do to deter and combat the Chinese.
So one of the other challenges we've seen is finding the workforce to build submarines, that even if the funding was there, there might be just personnel challenges. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Colbert, what do you think industry needs to do differently to address these workforce shortages? What are some solutions that they haven't thought about? What are some of the things that you're thinking about at Boeing in terms of tackling this issue? Maybe not around subs, but just expanding the workforce pool.
Yeah, indeed. We don't make subs, but we do all kinds of other things. So I'll talk about that. Look, workforce is the tip of every discussion that we have today about stabilizing and building up all of the things that we do in our business. And there's a ton of tactics that we're taking today, and I'll just share some with you that I think we can all leverage at scale. One is going back in the pipeline of talent and creating conditions to increase the width and breadth of talent in the STEM fields. We have a program that we kicked off down in San Antonio called TechPort that's bringing young talent into our environment, teaching them about aerospace and getting them curious about the things that we do, taking out the fear factor of really hard technical things to go solve, and really building that next generation of talent. The second area that I think is really important that I hope will speak to this audience is our veteran population. Our veteran population is rich with great talent. And notwithstanding the fact that we want them to stay in the military and continue to grow and develop and do their jobs there's a lot of folks that want to come and work in industry, and we've got to create environments so that they can transition into our companies. Our company's a little less than 15% veterans, and we want to keep that moving forward as we go forward. Another great source of talent. And then it's going after places, talent that we didn't typically go before, to open up the aperture of that pool. We go and recruit more and more at our traditional schools on the coasts in the middle of the country and frankly around the world, but also at historically black colleges and universities, a great rich source of talent around the country, and we're doubling down on that as well. So it is really all about thinking about what you've been doing for the last 10, 20 years, and then doing a bunch of things that are very different from that. And that's exactly what we've been doing, at least in our company. And then back to this discussion, let's leverage our global teams. Boeing is known to be a large exporter, but we also aspire to be a real global company that is building talent, capability, and capacity around the world. Not just sending work packages to parts of the world, but by building real end-to-end capability with our teams in different countries. And Australia is just a great example of that, where we've developed a platform, an autonomous platform, from scratch with a great engineering workforce focused on Australia, with opportunity to do all sorts of things in the long run. And so that's another piece of the equation, which is leveraging the global talent pool with our allies. So those are the things we focus on.
I mean, just really quick, so autonomous platforms, next generation talent, I think this brings up a really important point, which is that, we heard this morning the Secretary of the Air Force talking about how the next generation fighter is not going to be just a lot of man fighters, it's going to be a man fighter with autonomous counterparts. We're not talking about that enough in the Navy, but that's clearly coming. I think the Navy's a bit behind, candidly, at getting there. And when we think about what the next generation shipyard is going to be like, I agree we need to expand shipyard capacity, but it's not just in the traditional way to build the existing huge subs with lots of machinists and pipe fitters and welders. It's about developing underwater autonomous vehicles. And what do we need to produce those quickly and at scale and make sure they're the best in the world?
Yeah, look, our industry has typically been very long cycle in nature with the very big things that we build, mostly Newtonian-based. The future is about bringing together those big things that we build with great software, great technology, great networking, space. All those things move at a much more rapid pace than ever before. So we've got to have talent that knows how to move both at that pace and our traditional pace of moving.
I think it's incredibly important to build on what Ted said, and that is the Pentagon through the years has been a hardware-based organization. If you look at the future will be driven by software. The Pentagon needs to be a software-driven organization where software informs hardware, where software, through the use of AI and others, can adapt almost at real time to challenges that we face around the world. That's how we're going to successfully counter the building capability from adversaries around the world, making sure the Pentagon is a software-based organization.
The good thing about AUKUS proceeding right now is that in AUKUS Pillar 1, which is about nuclear-powered submarines, and AUKUS Pillar 2, which is about all emerging defense industries, technologies, and underpinning science, is that this is the double revolution being launched at the same time between yourselves, ourselves, and the Brits. And so therefore, it actually represents a new piece of, I think, very flexible machinery to deal with the enormous strategic utility and advantage which the United States has with both its SSN and SSBN fleets by adding SSN capabilities in our part of the world, but simultaneously mindful of everything that Rob's just mentioned and that Seth's touched on before. The Boeing Australia project is a really interesting one, this unmanned aerial vehicle going by the name of Ghostbat. It is right out there. It's really impressive, but it will become super impressive if once we remove ITAR's restrictions from around its future evolution, it becomes easily adaptable and saleable into the United States and to other allies as well, because that takes what is currently a really constrained process into one which is open, quick, nimble, free, personnel moving in both directions, common projects, rather than one which is bureaucratically tied to the earth, using a set of restrictions which assumed that the Australians and the Brits were as trustworthy as the Bulgarians and the Romanians 50 years ago, which is where the ITAR's regime came from. Getting beyond that, then we're dealing with the radical future of defence science and technology, as well as the immediate present, that subs are still critical. And I think that's why we down under are particularly enthusiastic about this.
And I love your concept of the revolution, and I think in my mind's eye, the revolution happens when the innovation can happen before the policy, you know? And my engineers in Australia, UK, in the United States can not work in their silos anymore, but sit in the same conference room on the same whiteboard and solve big problems without having to get licenses to go do that. And today, they have to get licenses to do everything from changing bolts on landing gear to figuring out how to deal with logistics in the sustainment world. That's the revolution, and that's what I'm hoping that we get out of acceleration around our efforts around AUKUS.
Under the current system, by the way, before this revolution, to order some replacement cruise missiles for Australian vessels and the Royal Australian Navy, from go to woe to get a new batch of cruise missiles, anyone that hazard a guess how long it took us just to get a batch of standard cruise missiles? 6 years. You wouldn't want to have a war looming, would you? And we actually bought the underpinning naval systems from you as well. Secondly, having got our cruise missile delivery finally, we then had to go through a separate ITAR process to get the operating manual for the new cruise missiles. That's how it works at the moment. We don't have time as friends, partners, and allies in the common cause of democracy to screw around anymore. This is too important.
As I was running in here to this panel, I saw Mac Thornberry, the longtime chairman of the Armed Services Committee and a mentor to me. And I said, what should I say about AUKUS? And he had time to say one thing, and he said, don't make it so hard to be our friend. That's a really good point.
I want to come back to GhostBat, and I want to go to Pillar 2, but before I do, I want to ask you something, Mr. Pottinger. I want to talk about some of the discussion we've heard about expanding AUKUS, given that we're talking about combating threats from China, and there are other nations in the region that are interested in doing the same, notably Japan and the Republic of Korea. Do you think the U.S. needs to think about expanding AUKUS, or do some of these sort of questions need to be sorted out first before you look at expanding it? Very simply, should we be talking about JAUKUS or RAUKUS?
Well, a former Australian Prime Minister who's not Ambassador Rudd, I think, recommended bringing France into it, which carries the risk that there would be an F before AUKUS. But,
You can't say that here out loud.
I don't think we need. I don't think we have to rush into growing it. Look, countries want, just like people want to be on a winning team. You have winning players in AUKUS. We have to pull this together, prove the concept, knock Pillar 1 out of the park, Pillar 2 out of the park. And then people will be knocking on the door to join. When we look at the future where we might expand AUKUS, I'd be looking at Japan first. What you need to do, I was talking earlier to Admiral Mark Montgomery, who's here. He was reminding me that whenever you have a group of countries trying to work together, it usually goes to the lowest common denominator. For example, if Japan is not a member of Five Eyes, the way that the UK, the United States, and Australia are, you would want to be able to share just as much sensitive intelligence and information, and to be able to stitch together that industrial base the way that Kevin's just laid out. I think we should bring Japan in, by the way, into Six Eyes. Make it Six Eyes. Yeah. And then, JAUKUS sounds better than the French alternative. So.
Is there a risk, though, and I think one of the criticisms we hear about potentially expanding it is that the alliance, this group is sort of, it becomes a tit for tat, that China's responding to the alliance and the work that's being done together, and that sort of leads to escalation. Is there a threat of that, do you think, in expanding to so many countries? Is that something worth thinking about as we...
That what?
That let's say Japan and South Korea join. Does it end up sort of creating a problem in some way, in that you have China responding to what the nations are doing, and it's an unintended escalation?
I see what you mean, yeah. Well, look, we'll go back to Australia for a moment. There's a historian named Geoffrey Blaney, who's from Melbourne, now in his 90s. I saw him when I visited this summer. He's terrific. He taught me, he wrote a really, really impressive book years ago called The Causes of War. And what he did was he examined 400 years, the last 400 years of war, and what their causes were, really interrogated that, as well as what allowed peace to break out. One of the amazing things he found that he wasn't expecting to find was that there's really no such thing as an accidental war. You don't provoke China, you don't accidentally stumble into a war just because we're giving ourselves a defensive capability designed to actually deter a war. We don't want to talk ourselves into the kind of fraudulent arguments that Vladimir Putin used to some effect where he was saying that NATO, this is really about NATO, even though NATO's been around for decades, it's never fought an offensive war in its history. And he says, yeah, I'm going into Ukraine because of NATO. That's fraudulent. In fact, if we had done more to shore up the defenses of Ukraine in advance, I don't think we'd be in the situation that we're in right now.
I'd back in what Matt said, and I've been studying China all my life. I started studying Chinese at the end of the Cultural Revolution, which begins to put a date on me. And it's a Marxist-Leninist party, and Matt's a student of China as well. Marxist-Leninists, in its core ideology, understand strength. They're respectful of strength and they're contemptuous of weakness. Everything else is detail. That's the core organizing principle of deterrence here. Therefore, we should not say, oh my God, will this result in some spiral? I think that was sort of the inference in your question. Our objective with deterrence is to cause the Central Military Commission to wake up each morning over there in Zhongnanhai in Beijing and having their shave of a morning, look in the mirror and say, I think it's still too risky still today to do something unilateral over Taiwan. And whatever the component parts are of that aggregate deterrence equation, whether it's nuclear boats, whether it is the other capabilities which are formidable with the United States Armed Forces, whether it's the capabilities of your allies, and whether it's platforms we haven't yet conceived of in the next 10 years, but which radically mix up the game. One of the worst things we can do is simply to engage in a static game. Deterrence is a dynamic equation, it's not a static equation. So I was so delighted when I heard C.Q. Brown before talking about his axiom for his period as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, which is always to be innovating and innovating ahead of time and ahead of the adversary. That is what produces the ultimate deterrent equation. None of us in this room want to see a war between the United States and the People's Republic of China. It would be catastrophic in its global consequences in terms of lives lost in the region, here and elsewhere. Therefore, getting this actual machinery of deterrence right, including these new elements which will come out of AUKUS Pillar 2 plus, asymmetric capabilities writ large, that is all part, I think, of the ultimate analytical prism in the Central Military Commission, which is this too risky? Is this giving the United States and its allies far too flexible, potent, and expansive a range of capabilities that we can't simply run our classic war game over Taiwan in reality?
Yeah, and I think, too, that's an incredibly important reason behind focusing on AUKUS as it is today with Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States to demonstrate that this agreement can work, to demonstrate that we have deliverables that come from this agreement, to demonstrate that we build that Pillar 2, which is, I think, the unspoken most important part of this agreement, not to diminish the submarine building enterprise. But I think being able to do that first is incredibly important. I think it speaks to the value of the agreement that others want to join already because they see what's unfolding with this. They see the value of this. But I would caution bringing others in at this point until we have a strong foundation moving forward this and we see those deliverables. And I think that they're going to happen. But remember, it's a long-term commitment by all of our governments. And we have to show that from Congress to Congress, from administration to administration, that this effort continues. I think that it will, but it will not be easy. Let's not dilute it by, at this point, adding others into it.
Let's stay with Pillar 2 and talk about technology. Ambassador, you mentioned GhostBat, and I want to ask you about it, Mr. Colbert. It's a collaboration that Boeing has done with Australia And I wonder what takeaways Boeing got from that program, and what does it tell us? How does it inform technology sharing in AUKUS going forward? Are there lessons learned that could be applied to AUKUS based on Boeing's experience with Ghostbat?
Yeah, similar to many of the things we've talked about, developing this autonomous capability in Australia, from design through to manufacturing, is a prototype factory. It's being built, it's flying, it's testing. Demonstrate the ability for the company to work together, engineers around the world to work together in vastly different time zones, which is a thing, obviously, and be able to field that capability with a lot of promise and potentially a lot of derivative capability going forward. What we've learned from it is, one, that we can do it, but two, it's really, really hard to do. Yeah. Really hard from a licensing and ITAR perspective. Our teams spend more time dealing with a lot of the ITAR policy types of issues than engineering in some cases. And that is not productive, back to the point that we were making earlier around, we're in a dynamic world that requires us to innovate at pace. So if you think about creating, an ITAR-free zone where we don't have to go after and get licensed for all this stuff, we can actually innovate at a much faster pace. And that to me is the biggest opportunity that we have going forward, is to increase the velocity of this innovation, of building on the capability that we started, using that as a pathfinder to learn how to globally engineer and develop defense capabilities and products, and porting that over to other things that support our collective fight, our allied fight together. The Pillar 2 items, many of them, sew us all together. Cybersecurity is ubiquitous. It's not a geographically discrete thing, it's everywhere. And if we figure out how to innovate, how to cyberproof our products and the environment around us together, it keeps us all safer in the long run. So again, all those learnings, it's getting the licensing and all this stuff in the middle out of the way so our people can actually do work.
I want to build on that and using a question from our audience, and I want to ask it to you, Congressman Moulton. Large defense companies will obviously have a major role in AUKUS. What is the place for smaller defense companies, I imagine particularly in technology, as you see it?
The innovation is happening at smaller defense companies right now. I mean, that's just reality. It's not that the primes aren't innovating to some degree, but the fastest pace of innovation is happening with the smallest companies, and we've got to bring them into the mix. And I love the idea of having you British and Australian companies be a part of that and fundamentally contributing to pushing the Pentagon. There's so many things that we do well, not just well, but the best in the world. Moving quickly with acquisitions and adopting new technologies is not one of them. And so the more pressure that we have, not just from smaller companies, but from smaller companies amongst our allies, the better, because we need to pick up the pace.
The other question, you guys successfully shot down any idea of AUKUS or JAWKUS, despite what a great name it would be. But one of the questions that people had is, if there's not an expansion of nations, could there be an expansion of capabilities that you could add into the AUKUS partnership? I'll leave that as an open question for whoever would like to take it.
I think if you look carefully at Pillar 2 of AUKUS, it's open on the technology question. It is the definitions contained within the draft legislation are broad, deliberately so, because there are categories of technology we'll be looking at in 5 years' time we haven't invented the taxonomy for yet. So why restrain ourselves to focusing on the steam engine and the internal combustion engine, because they're the two categories we know today. I think the key thing is to make sure that with the operationalization of AUKUS Pillar 2, and having clearly in our mind one mission statement, a seamless US, UK, Australian defence, science, technology, industry base. That is the mission statement. And I think if the legislation goes through in its current form and it doesn't get strangled by a subsequent set of regulations to give effect to the new legislation, and I'm optimistic that won't be the case, but I'm going to hang around to make sure it isn't, then I think we're going to go well with this. On geographical expansion, I agree with Rob, by the way, which is caution. And I agree with Matt that once we've got beyond kicking some real goals and convincing absolutely the American public, the political class in this country, Republicans, Democrats, House, Senate, those who have pored over the complexity of this legislation. I do, and I'm very respectful of how much time congressional committees have spent on this stuff, is if we get it through, we prove it's a success in our own countries and here in the United States, then why not have a long and open conversation with our Japanese friends? It's the third largest economy in the world. It has a phenomenal technology tradition. They've got some things to do in terms of their domestic protective security arrangements. They're fully familiar with that. They'd have to cross a whole bunch of those new thresholds. But I think we'd then seriously be cooking with gas if you had, us three and then downstream.
Yes.
Economies like Japan and Korea, think about Germany in the longer term as well.
And I think the greatest untapped potential in this agreement is Pillar 2. The things that we can do together, especially quantum computing, artificial intelligence, the technology that can be shared there is incredibly important. That will not get operationalized unless we as a Congress break down those walls that are placed by ITAR. ITAR is a Cold War relic that gets in the way today of 21st century needs for transfer of technology. That is the key to making sure that we unlock the potential in AUKUS under Pillar 2. And we can do that. We have to do that quickly. There's already a piece of legislation in. We need to get that passed, get that in place. Prime Minister Rudd, now Ambassador Rudd, has been an advocate through that whole period of time, from him being Prime Minister to now being Ambassador, to say, help us get rid of the impediments through ITAR. In fact, I think it was your words that said, Rob, you treat Canada better than you treat us under this agreement.
And they helped burn down the White House too.
That's right, that's right.
Ambassador, I'm going to give you the final question. There was a recent report by ASPE, the leading Australian think tank, that found that while Australia's made the necessary investments in AUKUS, its overall defense budget appears to be shrinking. How do you make sure that AUKUS doesn't cloud out other defense investments and innovation?
Well, the government back home has been pretty mindful of how do you incorporate this massive multi-$100 billion investment in becoming a country which can produce its own, service and maintenance its own nuclear-powered submarines, while doing the rest of what we need to do in terms of our overall capabilities set. It's for those reasons the Australian government recently conducted what is called the Defence Strategic Review, which is a complete re-examination of all the capabilities we have within Navy, Air Force, where we fly F-35s, as well as Army. And therefore, there will be some changes in the overall capabilities set, which will favour strongly Navy and Air Force. Secondly, you're going to see increased defence outlays. Current defence outlays in Australia are well above 2% of GDP. Whereas I cannot here say, in 3 years' time it'll be X, Y, and Z, it's heading north, not south, the simple reason that all these capabilities cost money. So, and also, we're confident that in Australia there is a deep sense of national security like there is in this country. We've shared so much in terms of the combined security burdens of the Indo-Pacific over, frankly, getting on for 100 years. And so therefore, no one in the Australian body politic, left or right, Labor or Conservative, has a view that national security comes for free. It doesn't. You have to invest and continue to invest and to continue to invest. I'm pretty confident that future Australian governments, mindful of the Defence Strategic Review, are going to put their shoulder to the fiscal wheel to make sure this happens. Because, when I first started focusing on this when I was Prime Minister, and I saw what was happening with the exponential increases, starting from about 2008-9 in the Chinese defence numbers, published and what we assumed were unpublished, that's when my own thinking on all these questions began to change fundamentally. We therefore have to be intelligent, disciplined in our country, United Kingdom. See what Kishida is doing in Japan with the doubling of defence outlays from 1% to 2% of GDP for a country which is the third largest economy in the world. That's going to be massively transformative, together with the great challenge you have here in funding the United States defence budget in the future. I think we're all capable of doing this. And remember, It's strength that folks look at from the Marxist-Leninist world, not sentiment and not seminars. Strength.
Well, we've covered U.S. domestic politics, Australian domestic politics, technology, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, and I just want to thank you all for such a thorough conversation. Audience, I ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for this discussion.